Roberto Pasini, arquitecto de tiempo completo en el Centro Garza Sada de Monterrey, de la Universidad de Monterrey, y director de la empresa AUS Pasini Rainery, activa en el campo de la arquitectura y el diseño territorial. En Harvard ha sido profesor y crítico de diseño en arquitectura, urbanismo y paisajismo. También ha impartido clases y dictado conferencias en varias instituciones en Europa, América y Asia. El tema que nos presenta es la construcción de una ruta cultural en la Comunidad Europea a través del sureste de Europa.
Thank you very much for inviting me here, first of all. The notion of cultural good has evolved its meaning, progressively broadening the semantic field associated with the hypernym heritage, extending it to include terms such as monument, site, cultural landscape, intangible heritage, and eventually cultural route. The cult of monuments intended in modern sense as elements of a tangible heritage bequeathed from the past and encapsulating collective memory can be traced back to the humanist Flavius Blundus, his De Roma Instaurata, an encyclopedic guide in 3 volumes reconstructing the topography of ancient Rome by means of philologically documenting its surviving ruins, drawing on classical literary sources and pioneering archaeological explorations. At the end of the 17th century, the young gentleman from English upper class of means started the tradition of a long trip across France and Italy, aimed at an in-depth exposure to the legacy of classical antiquity, Renaissance, and fashionable society of the continent as well. The Italienische Reise, 1817 by Goethe, is one of the highest records of this phenomenon. Well, what you see here as the first image that I propose to you is Goethe in his Grand Tour. This is a painting by Wilhelm Tischbein. He is sitting on the Via Appia Antiquia, the Regina Viarum. Well, it sort of recorded centuries and centuries of history, commerce, and military campaigns. It would run from Rome to Brindisi and connect Rome to Greece and the Orient. Goethe sitting on top and like surrounded by fragments from antiquity and works of art, but also on the background the Campagna Romana, this beautiful landscape. This painting represents a very modern, a very contemporary concept of cultural heritage, art, monuments, but also landscape, and a sort of combined work by man and nature. From an evocative perspective, the cultural route can be envisaged as the conceptual evolution of both the pilgrim journeys of the believers and the academic travels undertaken by scholars via the monasteries of Europe in the Middle Ages, as well as the Grand Tour run by the young gentlemen to gain an understanding of the foundations of European culture. And the notion of cultural route, interpretable as a matrix putting in reciprocal play the spheres of monument, site, natural and anthropic landscape, cultural, tangible and intangible heritage, shifts the interest from the single item to a wider composite atmospheric environment. And this is the sort of social and cultural, let's say, intangible heritage which is organized along this material structure, which is actually the route. We can call it a pattern of integrity using Buckminster-Fuller words, because it's a sort of material structure that organizing an ensemble of very heterogeneous and different things. Southeast Europe, not by chance, happens to be located on the borderline between the two blocks hegemonized by opposite totalitarian regimes of fascist and communist inspiration in the 20th century. Many cities and territories still bear tangible traces of the architectural heritage from totalitarian regimes of opposite signs. Some images from Tirana, Albania, picture from about 1900. Well, as you see, this is the main, let's say, plaza. Well, what you can see in this square is architecture from like fascist period, fascist era, cohabitating with the ancient mosque, probably the most ancient building still surviving in Tirana, the old clock from the 19th century, and the communist architecture of the Opera House, and some recent buildings of the democratic capitalistic phase. Another building you can see here. These are pictures from Prora. This is a huge sea bath establishment. It's several kilometers long with a monumental square right in the middle. Here, the artifact. And this is the celebration plaza. And this is the building, how it looks like from one side. It's a sort of infinite. Wustrov by Henrik Tessenov, 1933, another sort of sea bath establishment, but also originally the Flankschule project by Tessenov, very poetic and evocative location. Buildings are running down, so it's a patrimony that can be sort of rehabilitated. And on top of it, the Soviet army has left its trace after the Nazis. So it has already been re-inhabited and reinvented, and it can be re-inhabited again because buildings are shells. Here is another fascist plan for the city of Forlì, another monumental axis, the fascist Italian youth house, designed by Cesare Valli, a sophisticated and a wonderful Roman architect who was working for the fascists, but still the architecture which remains to us is this building. Here you see it as it was built in 1935. It's a beautiful example of Italian rationalism, drawing on classical canon. Well, you see it here behind, this very, very sophisticated architecture, which is a masterpiece. You can see it, like just how advanced was the architectural technique, allowing for a swimming pool to be placed within the building and to be liberated from a sidewalk, just opening a sliding glazed facade. And this is how it was left for decades until a few years ago. Now it looks like this. I will tell you a little story about the top of the tower. Well, on top of the tower, there was an ideous oath due by the young fascists to Mussolini. Well, after the Second World War, the partisans took the letters off, and such remained for a long time. Well, during the renovation of the building, there was a huge debate within Forlì, a very harsh debate. Intellectuals who were supporting the thesis that renovating the building, even the lettering should have been sort of reconstructed to, like as a testimony, as a witness of an historical fact. Some other were saying that probably the plaster should have covered everything, cancelling any memory of this ideous statement. Well, I personally took part in the debate, and I proposed to reconstruct the lettering, but stating a very different sentence, saying that that building had been built during the fascist time, but that democratic society is stronger enough to rehabilitate the same building, reconstruct it, to endow it much higher democratic functions. Well, this didn't go through. Final decision was that of a very, let's say, equilibrated decision, that of renovating everything except for this rectangle, in which they would keep both the trace of the lettering and the trace of the removal of it, so that it was a sort of record of history. The building is very beautiful, and now it will be put to the service of the democratic society. Well, one of the aims of the project is without doubt academic, that of locating such an architectural production into the vast panopticon of more and less democratic and utopian urban vision of the 20th century. Eur 42 in Rome, which is an example of this fascist architecture, but we see also Ivan Leonidov plan for Magnitogorsk, and Ville Radieuse by Le Corbusier, and Hilbersheimer high-rise city, and again Hilbersheimer working for the capitalists in Chicago. But the construction of an open archival of European totalitarian architecture, retraceable in a cultural route branching across the continent, is ultimately aimed at tearing a pan-European heritage from a collective, tragic memory of history, to be redeemed in the delivery of a future territorial vision for the people. The fundamental challenge that the renovated institutions are still facing is on what basis culturally and civically exercise a disquieting past in order to reinvent a vision for the reuse of its material remains and explore their possible economical profit to the benefit and edification of the contemporary democratic societies. And this was my last picture.
Bien, bueno, pues me parece que este concepto de las rutas culturales que Roberto Pasini nos ha presentado como una nueva concepto y estrategia para la conservación del patrimonio, y viendo la red europea que ya se ha venido configurando con esta identificación del concepto, pues me parece que es inquietante para nosotros en América Latina, en América en general, pues para poder, yo pensaría, seguir esos pasos y poder establecer una red panamericana, no paneuropea, sino panamericana, de rutas culturales. El caso que nos presentó esta mañana Francisco Bedregal, pues da pie a una ruta cultural panamericana, y también la presentación que nos hizo Carlos Bell sobre esta preocupación por rescatar un momento en la historia de la arquitectura y del urbanismo de la ciudad de Barranquilla, pues creo que con los temas de la arquitectura totalitaria y fascista, que tendrían un mal estigma, pues como dice Robert, las sociedades democráticas maduras deben de ser tolerantes y aceptar que son hechos, huellas de un momento de la historia y que no se puede ignorar. Entonces me parece que esa reflexión pues a mí me provoca que tenemos que seguir. Hay una nueva línea de trabajo para los arquitectos urbanistas, y bueno, que no depende de nosotros exclusivamente, pero algo tenemos que hacer en el contexto en el que actuamos.